Hey everybody, I'm Jack Rita. I'm with Future Pastimes and I'm a designer of board games and expansions. And I recently did a chapter by chapter breakdown of the novel Dune, where I talk about what happened in the chapter and I talk about some analysis, how it fits into the Dune universe overall, and how it was adapted in the two different movies and the miniseries. And a number of people asked me, well, what other books have you been reading? So I'm going to do a quick video here where I go through the last 10 books that I read. And I'll tell you a little bit about what goes on and what I think of that book. So let's dive in. The last thing that I read, I finished it 2 nights ago, and that's Conan the Invincible. And this is an oldie. I think it was published in the 80s. 1982 by Robert Jordan. So it's one of many Conan books that I have, and I've picked up a few more recently, and that's because I have a Conan board game that I designed that's coming out later this year. I've always had the complete collected works of Robert E. Howard. I'm a big fan of Conan, and I realized there's a lot of other Conan stories out there, so I've just been buying up all of the old Conan books that I can get my hands on, and I'm reading them. I'm reading another one by Robert Jordan, Conan let's see, which one is it? Because there are a lot of them. The Triumphant. That's the one that I'm currently reading right now, but I'm only a couple of chapters in. Conan the Invincible is pretty good. I mean, I've read a lot of different Conan authors, and I think Robert Jordan does a pretty decent job. Now, this is a very young Conan. It's not long after the events of Tower of the Elephant, which is a Robert E. Howard original story. And in this one, Conan he's off, he's in Zamora and in Shadazar, which is the city of thieves, and he's trying to make a living as a thief. And he gets hired by what turns out to be a sorcerer to get these pendants, and they were delivered by the king of Tehran to the king there in Shadazar as a sort of peace offering. They exchanged gifts. So he's been hired to sneak into the palace to get these things, but he gets there and somebody's already stolen them and made off with them. So he spends a lot of the novel chasing after whoever it is, and he runs afoul of a well-known bandit in the area known as the Red Hawk. And they kind of team up, but they're also being followed by soldiers who are looking for them as well. And there is another sorcerer who is the one that stole them. And so, yeah, it's pretty good yarn. It's good sword and sorcery bit. Conan's got some good one-liners in there. So, yeah, I enjoyed that a lot. It's probably not one of my favorite Conan ones from the other authors, but I think it holds up pretty well. Now, right before I started that, I just finished reading Mallerie. So Mallerie is a sequel to the Bird Box novel. Now, I saw the Bird Box movie on Netflix first before I read the book, and the book is really well written. Josh Mallerman does a good job. It's a page turner. Both books are really good, and the story in the Bird Box novel, it differs quite a bit from the Netflix movie, as one might expect, but thematically very similar, and a lot of the big strokes are about the same. And so this one picks up not too long. It's been a few years initially, and then there's a little bit of a time jump. So it deals with Mallerie being a parent of teenagers in this world where you can't ever go outside and look at anything because there are these creatures that if you see them, you go insane and you try to kill other people and then yourself, or just straight to killing yourself. So yeah, I enjoyed this one. I think I like Bird Box better, but I was really happy that there was a follow-up because I think it's a fascinating universe, and I enjoyed the Mallerie character, and they go through some really interesting adventures in their follow-up story there. So it was very compelling. It was very much a page turner. I started that after finishing up Holly by Stephen King. This is a really well written book, and I'm a big fan of Stephen King. I have almost all of his written works in some form or another. The Holly character is one that he introduced in Mr. Mercedes, and she's probably on the spectrum, but she's really smart, and she ends up becoming a private detective in the Mr. Mercedes trilogy. And she has shown up in a couple of other stories as well. She's in The Outsider, which is a really good book, and it was made into a great series on HBO. And she also shows up in, I think, If It Bleeds it's a short story collection, and she's in one of those stories. And this is a full novel where she is the central character. So it is a kind of a true crime mystery. Not so much of a supernatural bent on this one, but it's really interesting. The characters are great, and the way that she does her detective work is quite compelling. So I like that. As soon as there's a new Stephen King, I'm going to definitely scoop it up and read it as soon as possible. This one, it kind of fell in around the Christmas time era, so I didn't actually get it until Christmas, and then I read it. I recently read Monster Island by David Wellington. So this is a zombie novel, and I am a huge fan of zombie anything. So zombie movies, novels, games, what have you. This was a pretty good book. Now, so it turns out that David Wellington worked for the UN, and our main character in this is a UN weapons inspector. And then the zombie outbreak happens. And so he's in Africa when it happens with his family. And then he is basically captured by warlords in Africa. But it's a group of warlords led by a woman, and the child soldiers are all from a girls' school. So it's all of these armed teenage girls. But he helps them out on a mission which requires sailing from Africa to New York City to try to get a hold of some stuff. What's unusual about this book is that half of the book, or almost half of it, is from the perspective of one of the zombies. And it's actually a zombie who is able to think rationally and talk, because he kept his brain alive as he committed suicide. And you'd have to read it to fully understand how it works, but it comes across as pretty plausible. I didn't enjoy those chapters quite as much. And then there was a kind of a real weird twist there halfway through that has a kind of a different flavor of supernatural element to it. And that one I didn't get into as much. But half of the book about the UN inspector is written in first person, and those chapters are great. I really love it. And the other stuff is third person. Not as enjoyable for me, but overall I was glad that I read the book. So Monster Island, if you're into zombies, it's definitely worth checking out. There's some interesting stuff on there, some really nice action segments with the zombies, and some fresh stuff that's going on in there. Before that, I read Soji Shimada's The Tokyo Zodiac Murders, and this is a really good mystery. So it comes across as like, oh, this has really happened, and it's a long time unsolved case. Really engrossing, and I enjoyed the Japanese culture aspect to it, which always plays into it, and it gives this detective novel its own identity and flair. And I really enjoyed it. It was just an engrossing novel. So I don't read a lot of just pure detective stuff. If you haven't figured it out yet, I'm really into horror more than anything, which I guess surprises some people who are like, oh, you've read Dune so many times and you know it so well. And I don't read as much science fiction, although I do like science fiction, but I gravitate towards horror mostly, which is most of this list, but not exclusively. Before that, I read If This Book Exists, You're in the Wrong Universe. And it's Jason Pargin, who also writes under David Wong. This is actually the fourth part in the series that starts with John dies at the end. So I have all four of those books, and I really enjoy them. It's kind of a modern parody of almost Lovecraft, not quite Lovecraft, but it is in a similar vein, and it's really well written. It's really an interesting universe that he's creating here. And I love the little touches of he never mentions the town. It's always redacted. And the fact that he wrote some of the books under the name David Wong, that was part of his whole gimmick in the book, where he said he didn't want them to be able to track him, so he's using this fake name. And so, yeah, it's a very unusual universe that has to deal with monsters and things from beyond, and knowledge that man was not meant to know, and fiddling with it. And it always plays out really well. The second book is called This Book is Full of Spiders, and the third one is What the Hell Did I Just Read? And that's the kind of the sense of humor that is in here. So it is funny, it's amusing, but it's got some good, not so much scares, but some good horror elements to it that I really enjoy. And so if you like that almost tongue-in-cheek element to some horror, I highly recommend this series. They're all really good. The John dies at the end is probably the weirdest one. That one it's really out there. There's a movie of it that covers about 70% of what's in the book. So there's a lot more that goes on in the book. But if you are familiar with the premise there, this is in the same vein, although he does take it in new directions. All right. The next book that I read is called The Hunger of the Gods, and it's actually the second book in the series by John Gwynne. This is a fantasy series that is set in a kind of a Viking Nordic universe, but it's one in which about 100 years earlier, the gods, they were real, and they were these giant, like a dragon and a giant wolf, and these other figures, they fought it out and they wiped each other out. And it's a world in which their bones can be found, and they're still filled with power. In addition, there's a lot of characters that apparently the gods, very much like how Zeus would take on the form of an animal to sneak into somebody's house and then seduce the wife or whatever. The gods here could take human form, and they would mate with the humans, and they would have children which were sort of demigods. And the demigods are second-class citizens now. The pure-blood humans look down at them, they enslave them, they hunt them, and so some of the characters are these powerful half-bloods with abilities, but they're trying to keep it all on the down low. It is so well written. There's only two so far. There's going to be a third one. The first one is called The Shadow of the Gods, and it's just really well written. This guy is fantastic, and I'm going to start seeking out some of his other works because he apparently has written a lot of other stuff, and he's just a really fantastic writer. I was eagerly awaiting the publication of this book so that I could dive in, and it's hefty. There's a lot going on, but it basically follows three characters on their adventures, and we see how they intertwine eventually and then break apart. And the action is great. There is a lot of swordplay, but the descriptions are really interesting, and it just never gets tired, and you really want to know what's going to happen to these characters. So I loved it. It was fantastic. Probably out of this entire stack, this is the one I recommend the most. All right. Another follow-up that I read, The Destroyer of Worlds, and this is the sequel to Lovecraft Country by Matt Ruff. And this one is pretty good. I liked Lovecraft Country better, and so Lovecraft Country, it's sort of the Jim Crow era. It's from the perspective of a lot of African Americans dealing with racism in America, and but crossing paths with characters that could basically be ripped right out of Lovecraft. And in fact, they refer to Lovecraft in the stories. They refer to that area that he wrote about as Lovecraft Country. In that first book, they go there, and they're dealing with the evil, not just of racist white society, but of these Lovecraftian necromancers and beings from beyond. And the HBO did an adaptation of that book. It wasn't super faithful. It was pretty interesting. I liked it. It was enjoyable. The book is definitely better. This one has to also do with the nuclear testing out in the West. It's a follow-up. It's the same characters. It's not quite as good, but it is interesting, and I do hope that there are more adventures because the characters are very interesting and enjoyable. So I did enjoy this book. I'd love to get to see some more Lovecraft mixed in there. So here we're dealing mostly with just horrible bigots, and sometimes when they get their comeuppance, it makes me very happy, and there's plenty of that. But I like more Lovecraft in my Lovecraftian horror. So that's my only real criticism of that. Before that, I read Craig Harrison's The Quiet Earth. So this is kind of an older novel as well. Let's see if I can see. Yeah, 1985. No, that was a different book. This was 1981. So I heard about this because I actually saw a movie adaptation in the 80s that was okay. It has a lot of interesting ideas. It wasn't a great adaptation. The book is a lot more interesting, but it is it's a slow burn, and so it's an interesting premise. Basically, you've got this character who wakes up and seemingly is the last person left on the planet. Everyone else has just disappeared, and there's no explanation for what happened to them. So he's struggling with what he's going to do with himself and trying to figure out what happened. And so it's fascinating. And I love dystopian novels, and I love post-apocalyptic novels. This is a little bit of that, but it's a really interesting story, and I kept wanting to keep going. So that's a good sign. I like to. I want a novel to suck me in, and I think part of it was I kept expecting things from the movie to happen, and it didn't really happen that way. So, like I said, it's not necessarily a good adaptation, and the movie is not great. It's okay. I've seen it a couple of times. First time I saw it, they had the reels in the wrong order, and there was no way for them to fix it, so we just watched it that way. It was the first reel, and then it was the third one, then the second, and then the fourth. It didn't make it that confusing. We were able to figure it out, but it was just kind of weird to watch it. But yeah, not the best production. And then finally, we have Audition by Haruo Murakami. And this one I read because I was a fan of the movie. So it's a horror movie about and the book is the same. The book is actually very close to the movie. It's the movie is a great adaptation of the book. So the story is about a bachelor, a widower actually. His wife died. He has almost an adult son, sort of college age, and the son is like, you should remarry, Dad. You should get out there, and he's like, yeah, he is lonely. He would like to meet somebody and have a relationship again, but he's just like he's been out of it for a while. Doesn't really know how to do it, and he has a friend who is a TV producer, and he says, well, why don't we just have an audition for like a fake movie? And you can meet these women and interview them and get a sense of who they are. And then we can say the movie didn't fall through, and then, you can try to fall in love. So they do that, and they meet a lot of women. And the main character meets somebody that he thinks is great, but she is not great. There's definitely something sinister going on, and I'm not going to give anything else away, but it's really good. The book is really well written. There's just this pervasive sense of dread that things are not going to work out, and you're just waiting to see how it's going to manifest. And I already had seen the movie, so I had a good sense, but wow, the book really delivers as well. So it's really good. So that's what I've been reading, and I recommend pretty much everything on here. I think, Monster Island was the one where it was a little bit hit and miss for me, but everything else was really great. If you've read any of these, let me know what your thoughts were. And if you've got recommendations now that you've got some sense of my taste in literature, let me know that as well in the description. And I'm going to read through a bunch more books. I'll do another video here in a few months. I read pretty quickly. I mean, I definitely have been reading other stuff as well. A lot of comic books and graphic novels. I didn't necessarily include those in here. And there's a lot of stuff that I have been rereading. I guess that's the other thing, is that these are all first-time reads for me on this list. I reread a lot of novels that I enjoy quite a bit. I reread the Game of Thrones novels, a lot of different Stephen King, Lovecraft, of course, a lot of Michael Crichton that I read again and again. So I read pretty fast. I go through stuff. So yeah, I will definitely have another video like this, unless everybody hated it. And if you don't want me to do any more of these videos, then yeah, well, not necessarily you have to say so, but we'll see. We'll see what the reception is. So that's it for this one, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.